far and away the most advantageous piece of hiring a search consultant. The other things are important, and those happen too, but number 4 certainly trumps the rest of them. So let me tell you a little bit about how McPherson Jacobson, the firm for which I work, manages to carry out those 4 steps that I just showed there. First of all, we've been leading superintendent searches since 1991. The firm was founded in Omaha. Still, the home office is still in Omaha. Although when I say home office, that's a little bit of a misnomer. We actually have 3 employees. And they handle the back office tech, posting of vacancies, that sort of thing. Our model is use of independent consultants like myself across the country with the support of the office in Omaha. It was founded in 1991 by a college professor in Nebraska, primarily to serve school districts in Nebraska. Over the course of the next 30 plus years, it's expanded significantly, obviously, but that's our genesis. We have a network of over 130 consultants across, as you can see, 30 states, more than 30 states. And you might say, well, why is that? Why would I care about that? I don't care what's happening in superintendent search in Virginia or in Florida or in Washington. And that's true. You're only really concerned about this. But remember number 4, that point number 4 that I showed you on the previous slide. We talked about vetting and both recruiting and vetting candidates. And regardless of where we do the search, almost 50% of applicants are from outside of the state where the vacancy is. So it doesn't matter if we're doing a search in Colorado or Florida or Arkansas, Washington, about 50% of applicants come from outside of the state. So I'm based in Colorado. If we get Colorado applicants, I don't have any difficulty at all very, very quickly doing very deep vetting and background checks on those applicants. Chances are I might even know the applicant. And if I don't know the applicant, I know somebody who does know them, or know somebody who does know them or know them. If we get an applicant from West Virginia, I wouldn't have that same advantage. Although I bet I have a colleague in West Virginia or near West Virginia that has that same advantage. So we activate our network all across the country not only when we recruit on the front end and say, hey, here's this great job available in the Tri-Lakes area in Colorado. Do you have any applicants that you know that you might be able to encourage to look at this opportunity? But also at the back end when we're vetting candidates, making that call and saying, hey, can you put me in touch with someone that can really give me the true information about this candidate? So our model is we use national recruiters and Colorado consultants for Colorado searches. So that's just a list of my colleagues. And actually now the owner of our firm, as of about a little over a year ago, is former superintendent in Colorado Springs District 11, who now lives in Arvada. And so he owns McPherson and Jacobson. And then, as you can see, we have the state covered. I live here in Colorado Springs. My colleague Ken lives in Grand Junction. Henry Roman lives in Pueblo. Christy Center lives in Durango, and Randy in Loveland. So we have the state covered, and we all help each other immensely, especially when it comes to vetting and recruiting Colorado candidates. So the other thing that McPherson Jacobson really prides itself on is equitable and objective engagement of stakeholders. And I told you that's one of the things that any good firm can do, right? Because they are independent and outside. But we pride ourselves on providing open access, online feedback, both in terms, pardon me, both in terms of surveys and narrative forms, as opposed to what you might have seen in the past or been part of in some other focus groups or interview committees, anything like that, which are by their very nature very small, very closed. It doesn't represent all voices equally. And one of the things that we're committed to is to have all voices equitably heard in this process. So when we are in the front end and gathering feedback about what are the challenges, what are the opportunities, what are the criteria that's desired, we want anybody in the community who wants to have a voice in that, participate in that. We'll talk about that in just a minute. When we get to the back end and we have final candidates out in front of folks, pardon me, we want anybody, not just 6 voices who may have been selected to be part of a committee. We want anybody in the community to share their thoughts about candidates, and we'll talk a little bit about how we're going to do that in a minute. So McPherson Jacobson, we've been around, like I said, since '91. We've done over 1,000 searches in 45 states. I'll tell you, quite honestly, that's not all that impressive a data point. There are 2 or 3 other search firms across the country that have equal numbers. And the reason is because there are only 2 or 3 search firms that really have the reputation of doing this really, really well over a long period of time, and we get most of the work. So that is not super, that doesn't really stand out among the 3 or 4 national search firms across the country. But we have a long-standing track record of successful placements that does stand out. And that track record is this: nearly 80% of the candidates that we've placed over a rolling 5-year period are still in that job in 5 years. That number goes to about 50% after 10 years. Now, if you're thinking about it in terms of an academic scale, right, that's an F, right? But if you hit 50% in the major leagues, you're going to end up in the Hall of Fame. So understanding what turnover is like, especially for superintendents, right, the national data is average a little over 3 years. So we're really proud of that data. What I will tell you is I'm not naive enough to think there's not some measure of good luck in those numbers. There's got to be, right? You have to be lucky at some point. But I also think that a lot of the work that we do up front, the stakeholder engagement, the vetting of candidates, making sure that it's the right fit, it's not just the right skill set, but the right skill set and fit, leads to those kinds of numbers. And then a number that nobody can compete with is, we've completed nearly 60 Colorado searches in the last 5 years. Matter of fact, by the time we finish this cycle, we'll be over 60. So we do far and away more searches in Colorado, exponentially more than any other firms. And then so one of the reasons that that's true is because we have an exclusive partnership with the Colorado Association of School Boards and the Colorado Association of School Executives. Both of those entities, CASB, the School Boards Association, for a long time, and CASE for a shorter period of time, also used to do superintendent searches. They learned fairly quickly that number one, it really wasn't a moneymaker for them, and number two, unless it's something that you really do that is really a core competency, and you have the engine behind and the tested protocols, it can be very, very difficult work and sometimes not very successful work. And so CASB, 3 years ago, decided that they were going to get out of the business of doing superintendent searches. CASE did, followed a year later. And both of them interviewed search firms to see who they could partner with in the long run that would serve both school executives, boards, and also provide a vehicle for getting the best talent in the best places in Colorado. So McPherson and Jacobson has had this exclusive relationship for now going on 3 years. So among those searches that we've done in Colorado, here are recent searches that I personally have done. And I put this up here only so that you know I'm just not up here telling you all these things without some validation behind them. So these 16 searches, these I have done in the last 2 years. And so you'll notice a number right, as Ms. Upchurch said, right here in the vicinity with Academy 20 and District 49, School District 11, Manitou Springs, some on the western slope, some in the southeast corner of Colorado. A couple out of state, Albuquerque Public Schools, the Nebraska State Board of Education. So all of these searches were very, very different. And the reason I put that up there is to show you how vastly different the school districts that we serve are, and no two searches, as a result, none of our searches look the same. So as we started working with the board, I'm going to show you a chart here on the next slide. As we started working with the board, one of the things that we do most is try to customize this to best meet the board and the community's need wherever we go. As you can imagine, Albuquerque with 77,000 students or Academy 20 with nearly 30,000 are very different from Custer County with 350 or Edison with 85. So we have very, very proven protocols, but we also have to be very nimble in what we're doing. I'm not going to go over this chart in great detail, but I just want a couple of highlights. We talk about our searches in phases, phase 1 through 4. We start with phase 1, obviously. When we end phase 4, we step into the interviews with finalists. So everything else in the process happens between phase 1 and phase 4. So if you'll notice, phase 1 says meet with the board too, and then talks about these things. We did that last week. So I met with the board and we built the blueprint, if you will, for getting the vacancy announcement, the opportunity to apply for this position out the door. Once that happens, then I go to work in phase 2 and phase 3, including stakeholder feedback that we'll talk about in just a minute. And then I'm going to come back and meet with the board in March to do phase 4. And I'm going to show you the timeline here next, and I think that'll make a little more sense. But when I refer to a phase, that's what we're talking about. And then you can see the candidate is selected here, and phase 5 happens a couple of months after the new superintendent arrives. We work in transition. We do some team building and some strategizing with the board to make sure that everybody's on the same page, and we get a really, really solid launch in terms of a solid governance team pairing the board with the superintendent. Again, we think that phase 5 is one of the reasons why we end up with that retention data I showed you a couple of slides ago. And so that we think that's a really important piece. So here's the timeline. People want to know what's going to happen and when. So last week, February 6th, right here, that was phase 1. That was that initial board meeting. Application posted maybe even tonight or within the next 24, 36 hours at least. We launched the online survey February 9th. We're going to talk about that in just a second. Tonight, we're here at this stakeholder presentation, February 12th. So you can see here the survey is going to close in a couple of weeks. The application deadline is March 8th. And then over here on March 20th, you'll see the reference again to phase 4. That's when I come back, meet with the board. By that time, we have vetted candidates. We've sorted and ranked candidates. We've invited select candidates to produce video responses to questions. We've matched the candidates with the criteria that we heard from the board. We've matched candidates with criteria and characteristics that came from stakeholders, and all with the idea of leading up to April 4th and, April 4th and 5th. And April 4th is a Thursday. Now, this is all contingent on dates holding, right? We think they will, but they may move. We don't want them to, but they may have to. April 4th, we're going to have a public forum with the finalists, however many finalists there are. There may be 2, there may be 3, there may be 4. We're going to have a public forum. We're going to stream that public forum. We're going to ask them questions that are derived from the community stakeholder survey. And then we will also, following the conclusion of that, have the opportunity, much like the survey that is out there right now, we'll have the opportunity for any interested community voice to register their thoughts about concerns or strengths presented by each of the candidates. So it's not an interview committee. It's not a select group of 6 or 8 folks who would report back what they heard to the Board of Education. We will have the opportunity for large-scale public feedback to be gathered and synthesized and shared with the board. April 5th, the board, the next day, so this is a Thursday, on Friday, the board will interview those finalists in person. And then we have April 15th as the date. That is a currently scheduled Board of Education meeting. That's why that date is the target for the board to publicly announce their selection for superintendent after some negotiation, and all happens in those 10 days after the interviews. This shows a start date of July 1. That's the typical start date. Fiscal year for school districts, July 1 to June 30th. Contract year mirrors that. Obviously, Given Dr. Summers' departure date and things in flux, this really would ideally be a no later than. And if there's opportunity for earlier onboarding and transition, we certainly would facilitate that to make it happen. So I want to go to this next to last slide and just circle back with the CASB, Colorado Association of School Boards, and Colorado Association of School Executive Partnership. When we built this partnership, the goal was to create a mechanism by which we could sustain leadership over the long term, right? McPherson and Jacobson is a search firm. We're going to do that phase 5, which is that initial sort of launch into the next phase, which is the new superintendent and the board coming together as a governing team. But after that, we really sort of go away, right? The long-term support, professional support for the Board of Education is the Colorado Association of School Boards. Much like the professional organization for long-term professional growth and professional support for the superintendent is the Colorado Association of School Executives. So as we go into that phase 5 work, we come alongside with folks from CASE and CASB and do that as a team so that we continue that momentum. It's a handoff, if you will, as opposed to us saying, you know, thanks for allowing us to find your next superintendent, good luck. We want to make sure that we set a path for not only the superintendent to be successful, but the board as well, and especially the two together as the governing team. So I have one final slide, and that is just to call your attention to the stakeholder survey, the community survey that is out now. I think it launched on Wednesday. For those of you here in the audience, there's a QR code on your table that will take you to the survey. There is a link on the district's website. There is a link on the district Facebook page. Is that right, Mark? So there are ample places to find the survey. It's not lengthy. It's a combination of rank and sort menus plus narrative. So we don't want to just do a multiple choice and pigeonhole folks into responses. There's ample opportunity for narrative responses on there. But it is a critical piece of this process that going forward will help inform the development of interview questions, especially for those public forums that we're going to do on April 4th. It will help us in vetting candidates, making sure, remember, we want the right fit. We don't want just the right skill set. That's sometimes the easy part. We want that fit, so we need to know what the community is thinking, what the community expects, and candidates need to know that. And what we hear repeatedly, time after time after time, is that the results of these stakeholder surveys, while they're important for those other things that I talked about, I think maybe the most important thing is a handoff to that ultimately selected candidate as a tool for transition. The best candidates will dive into that, they will read it, they will study it, they will use that to help them know which questions they need to ask first, who they need to connect with most quickly, what things are going really, really well that they better not mess up in the first 90 days, all those kinds of things. And so it is really critically important that we get as much participation in this survey as possible. So please, it closes on February 21st, midnight, I believe, on the 21st. So you have some time still, but don't wait. We have almost 600 responses as of this evening already, so we'd love to get about 4 times that at least by the time we shut this thing down. So please dive in and help us with that survey. So with that, I will stop and ask the opportunity, ask for any questions, and I'll do my best to either answer them, or if I don't have an answer, I'll make one up. So, what questions do you have lingering about anything you heard here or something you did not hear? Here. Please.
I'm going to hand you a microphone.
Oh yeah, microphone.
I'm just wondering what the desired characteristics that D38 has already said to you are key components for their superintendent?
Yeah, so, so those are available. Do I have an internet connectivity here? I can get to those very quickly if you would like to see them. Can you?
So while Dr. Cooper's pulling those up, we discussed that at our work session last Monday, which is also streamed. So if you want to tune into that to see, and we did an exercise to the. We came up with our priorities, and we brainstormed them, threw them all out there, then ranked them on a measure of importance. All of that data, though, is still collected and still fits into what the community says, what are our staff and our students, our families, and our friends in D38. And so all of that is used to form what the question and the criteria will be. So, and it's a very strong desire and very important to us as a board that this community in D38 is a part of this process, that this is not us doing this to our community, but that we are searching for our superintendent with our community. So in addition to the forum, what we're going to be doing is we're also going to be going out and visiting the schools, the staff meetings, PTOs, BACs, DAC, and engaging in two-way dialogue there. And then the other thing we're doing is we're forming a committee. So when we do the forum, it'll be similar to a candidate forum. And so when the questions are asked, any questions can be asked from the community, but there will also be questions that will be formulated from a committee that will form a committee to help facilitate that as well. While they're pulling up that. Yep. So the question was, when we're conducting the forum, how will that be done? Where will the questions come from?
So we're still workshopping it, but ideally what would happen is a community group of interested individuals would come together. That would be spearheaded by Dr. Cooper here, and they would come together and create those questions so that they're not known in advance to the candidates, but they are a community effort.
So the order of operations there, I'm sorry, we have a tech glitch here, but I'll read them to you here in a minute. The order, I was listening to your question, the order of operations there would be, we want to get the results of the community survey back first. We'll prioritize or show what those priorities were and those interests, and then we will craft interview. We'll have a committee put together that will brainstorm and craft half a dozen or so questions that we will ask folks in a round robin panel, if you will, that directly tie to what we heard in the they won't be the same questions the board asks, for example, but what we heard in that community survey will be the catalyst for developing those questions. So it won't be a question from the floor kind of thing, but the candidates will not have scripted questions to prepare for, to respond to.
And so then on that topic of pulling a committee together of, interested parties in our community, how will you determine who sits on that committee and what groups would you include?
So we're going to follow, do you want to take that?
Sure. So the question was, how is the committee going to be formed? It will be formed similar to how we did the last superintendent search. Anybody and everybody can apply, just put your name in there. It'll be a random selection. If we have 18 people and that's it that's interested, then 18 people will be on the committee. If we have 50 people, then it'll be a random selection. But we want to make sure that we have equal representation from all stakeholders across the district. Did that answer your question?
So I apologize, I can't get this one on the screen. My computer did not like to connect like Mark's, but the criteria were this. Board of Education seeks an inspirational leader who demonstrates an ability to earn trust with staff members, parents, and the community at large. Integrity, a tireless work ethic, strong emotional intelligence, and power and quality listening skills. A willingness to honor the successes and traditions of D38 while looking forward as a data-informed strategic innovator. Commitment to high standards, continuous improvement, and accountability for all. Advocacy for local control and the ability to view the greater educational landscape as it impacts D38. the capacity to embrace disruption as an opportunity and from important, a regular presence in schools and genuine advocacy for students and staff, and balanced academic and business acumen, experience effectively managing human capital, a record of fiscal responsibility, and demonstrated leadership over time. So one of the things that we, when I worked with the board, showed them a flow chart of why we do these exercises. One of the things we will require every candidate to do, whether they're selected to move forward or not, one of their initial steps into this process will be for candidates to craft a narrative response to all of those criteria. So that really is the, for lack of a better term, the written part of their initial application, beyond cover letter and resume and that sort of thing. And then these will also then, in combination with what we learned from the community survey, translate into the selection rubric that the Board of I took the slide down, that the Board of Education will use ultimately when they interview those finalists.
And did you also notice the emphasis on kids first?
Why that's not.
Any other questions?
What other questions can I?
Tony.
Yes, sir.
Sir.
So on one of the slides, it talked about the 2-year guarantee. What does that entail, and when does that start, from the date of hire?
It does. It starts from the date of hire. So if most all boards that we work with choose to do that phase 5 with us, not all, but most do. So if a board commits to doing phase 5, which is the, it doesn't cost them any more to do it, it's just a choice. If they commit to and work through phase 5, then from the date of hire, if in the first 2 years there's a separation for whatever reason, either by board's choice or the superintendent's choice in those first 2 years, then we'll redo the search for no fee.
Next question, for successful placement metrics, do you guys measure anything else besides retention? Like if a district had a high education standards, do they maintain everything?
No,
other
no.
metrics for that?
The only data points we have are person still in the job at those benchmarks 3, 5, and 10 years.
Does anybody else? I got another one.
No, have at it.
On one of the slides, it talked about 50% of applicants are out of state. Is that because of the firm, or is that like a typical thing?
I think that's typical. So it's not that we, and I didn't put that up there because necessarily the best applicants come from out of state. That really was to emphasize why it's important that we have folks across the country that can step into other places and help us vet. Because regardless of whether we try to recruit or not, we typically get right around 50%. And it doesn't matter if that vacancy's we get a little more in Colorado, understandably, right? Who doesn't want to live here? But really, it's almost anywhere where there is a vacancy, we'll have just about as many in-state applicants as we do out-of-state applicants. And to that point, we don't have, McPherson Jacobson doesn't represent clients. Nobody pays us a fee. We don't have a stable of clients. We're not a headhunter. We're not trying to place specific individuals. We take all comers who want to apply for, we have a vast advertising network. We'll take all comers that wish to apply, and then we start vetting all of those candidates. So if we certainly will recruit folks if we know folks from other searches or through our vetting or whatever. I mean, we engage with a lot of folks in a year's time across the country, and if we think there's somebody who would be a really good match, we'll say, hey, I think you ought to look at this one. But we don't identify a target pool of folks to bring forward for any one specific vacancy.
And you talked a little bit about your processes. How does that gone through the years as improving from year to year and search to search, and what can D38 gain from those evolutions?
So I would say that the most obvious and largest evolution is the manner in which we gather stakeholder feedback. So we were a little slow, and I say we in the search, I can't speak for anybody else, but I will speak for us. We were a little slow to abandon the old focus group approach, right? Where, you know, you go and you meet with a grade school or an elementary school building accountability committee, for example, or you have an evening meeting in the cafeteria at the middle school and invite folks to come. And so for years, right, really the only way to engage folks and get feedback from community, albeit it was a very, very small and biased number, if you will, right? Sometimes it was the loudest voice in the room, not the general voices in the room. And it really was very difficult to get large-scale actionable data that we could really use in the search process. Now, with digital tools that are out there, we can do just the opposite of that. We don't have to invite folks to meetings. You know, post-pandemic, many folks will take a virtual opportunity as opposed to doing, you know, and doing it on their own time, especially if they can do that. But the data that we collect is much more intentional. It's much more actionable, and that just evolved over time, right? It didn't happen just immediately. Another piece to that is we use one-directional video interviews very early in the process. So we don't wait until just and invite finalists to do, it's pretty simple. It's 3 questions. They're 3 minutes apiece. They have to record them. We've moved that part of our protocol way up in the order of operations, if you will. So we get a lot better initial engagement with candidates than we would have otherwise. Those are 2 examples of things that we've changed. But the stakeholder feedback is from my perspective, that's far and away the largest.
Ms. Thomas.
I just have 2 questions. Where will the positions be posted? I saw it on your site there, you know, open positions. Where else will possible candidates find that?
So we post, this is another thing that's evolved over time. Used to be we always would get the question, so is this going to be a national search or more like a local search, right? I remember when I was in my previous professional life and hiring, I would often hear that. In today's digital environment, everything becomes a national search. So we use our social media platforms. That's the free stuff. The paid advertising venues we typically hit are the American Association of School Administrators and topschooljobs.org. That's the online job board for Education Week publication. Most anybody, and we always ask candidates, where did you learn of the vacancy? Those 2, far and away, outpace every other venue that we post. But we also will post in Chalkbeat. We post at alternative candidate venue is the Broad Center at Yale University. We post there. We post school board websites, Colorado Association of School Executives, Colorado Association of School Boards. Many of those networks of administrator associations then have subsequent reciprocal postings and others. So it happens very, very quickly. But the 2 largest, far and away, exponentially greater coverage are the American Association of School Administrators and topschooljobs.org.
Great. The other question I had was, you said that we were sitting at about 600 responses right now, and you wanted significantly more than that by the 21st. What's going to happen between today and the 21st to try to get those responses?
Could you hand that microphone to Mr. Belcher behind you, and he will answer that question?
So we engage a number of techniques. Obviously, we have pushed it out to all of our community members. We text to about 10,000 phone numbers. We email to about 30-ish thousand, 35,000 emails. So we'll push that again at least 1 time, probably 2. We also have paid ads on social media, and it's also linked on our website, which does get significant traffic. So I anticipate we'll probably get to about 1,200, but we'll see. That is a really great question. So I'm going to move just a little bit, so hopefully I get away from that weird spot where there's weird waves. So our lists are created in a couple different ways. We have a lot of alumni families who remain in the area after their kids graduate. So that makes up the biggest chunk of our list, about 20,000. We have about 1,200 interested community members who have signed up over time to get our updates. You can do that at the top right hand. And then finally, we have our 10,000 parents.
I just wonder if when you talk about, you know, at the top of the website, you know, I'm wondering if the district has done anything to like send out a mailer to some people who are not as technically savvy or engaged, but still are invested in their community and their schools, and then you can send a mailer out that says, hey, here's, you know, a QR code or some way to engage or to provide us your emails or your text messages or whatever you want to do for us to give you opportunities to participate in the community.
Sure. So specific to the survey, it's a really quick turnaround. So we're not going to have the time or the budget to get that out there. But absolutely, we're always going to try to look for ways to continue to get people to sign up, to get onto our mailing list or to get onto our email list and our text list. And we'll continue to look for ways to do that. Thank you.
What other questions?
I noticed on your slide that one of your pillars or phases, I think it might have been phase 3, you talked about doing video question responses.
Yes.
Do you implore that practice with our district, and
Yes.
what does that look like? Where do
So-
the questions come from?
Yeah, so that was one of the things that I was talking about. We've moved up in our process. So we used to do that with just the last segment, right? But now we move it. So we craft 3 questions. They're relatively general questions, but we tie them to the district, right? So we ask, for example, one of the questions is based on your research. I'm not giving anything away because they can see them before they answer. Based on your research of District 38, why do you believe your path has led you to be an effective leader for Lewis Palmer School District, right? They have 3 minutes. We ask them about, well, we can ask varying things. Sometimes it's about leadership style. Sometimes it's about a specifically demonstrative example of increasing student achievement. Maybe it's something around finances. But so we ask those 3 questions, which then go to the board. Now, remind me to tell you something about the stages, okay? Which ultimately go to the board with the applicant file, the digital file, those things that we build a folder for the board over time, so they're reviewing applicants as we go through this as well. But that serves as a screening tool for us, initial screening tool for us, moving into that phase 4, and you're right, you saw that in phase 3, then that would move into phase 4, and we would hand that information off, not without me there, but I would bring that information to the board for their review. So let me make sure I answered your question, and then I want to say something else about that process. Did that answer your question?
Yes, my only question is, when you ask those questions, are they through, like, they go online, they click a link, the question happens 3 minutes, or is it in person? Is it like you're
No.
sitting across from me on the screen?
It is not two-way. So the example, it's the first thing that you just said. They go on, and there are parameters in the system, it's a third-party system, that we can set. We don't set it to try to trap people. So they can see the question, they can look at the question, they can think about, they can go out and shovel snow while they think about the question, come back in, sit down and record it. If they don't like their answer, they have an opportunity to, now once they hit submit, that horse is out of the barn, it's not coming back.
And the reason I asked that is because, I mean, I could think of, I mean, your 3 questions may be finance, whatever, you know, the examples you just gave. But I think about more in-depth, targeted, focused areas in education that, you know, you would want to ask somebody like in an open forum about and get an immediate response. We wouldn't want somebody to go out and research and formulate an answer. And that's why I'm asking about that
Right.
and what that
and,
looks like.
and so, and remember, these are screening, the purpose of these are to aid in screening, right? So it's, there will be an opportunity for a deeper dive on those kinds of questions, like in the public forum. And the questions that the board ultimately asks, they don't see those either, right? So this is a slight step up from just a paper screen, right? It's a digital addition to what we've always done in terms of paper screening, if that analogy makes sense.
That's great.
So what I was going to say is that you've heard me talk about finalists and candidates throughout this, and semantics are important in this. And so until the board gets to the point where they name finalists for the position, and that will happen somewhere around March 20th, 22nd, somewhere in there, right? After the purpose of phase 4 is to get us to the point where they can name their finalists. Up until that point, everything by Colorado law is confidential, right? So once an individual is named as a finalist, then their information becomes public information, and there's a public process that the board must follow around interviews and all that sort of thing. So really up through phase 4, it's not that the board is trying to be secretive or is failing in transparency or anything else. There are just a myriad of things that until a candidate is named as a finalist, that information can be held in confidence, and quite frankly, that strengthens the pool. So we work in a lot of states where that is not the case. I just finished one in New Mexico, for example. There's absolutely no confidentiality at all from the time that the posting closes. That has a significant impact on the pool, as you might imagine.
Yeah.
Right? Folks just are not going to be willing to be that far out in front of their communities back home and think, well, if I'm going to be listed out there as one of 25 potential applicants, the odds are not really necessarily in my favor. If I'm going to be listed as one of 3, I'll roll those dice, and I'll deal with it back home if I'm not selected, and then have to step back in my community. So Colorado has a nice balance of that, I think, a balance of the transparency and also confidentiality. So I say that just because there will be weeks worth of work here that the community is probably going to not really know what's going on,
Sure.
but it's going on.
Yeah. I appreciate that.
Yes, sir.
When the candidates see the announcement, do they have the opportunity to know what the board's criteria are, what you read us so that specifically?
That is embedded in that's where the announcement starts. The announcement says the board of Lewis Palmer School District 38, Monument, Colorado is looking for, and here's what they're looking for, primarily. And then we attach to that, Mr. Belcher's provided the Elevate document, the profile of the document, or the profile of the district is attached to that. When the stakeholder report, when I get that finalized, that'll be attached to that. So they'll have ample information. And if they want to get to the finals, they'll take advantage of having access to that information. The best candidates will do their research. They will be very focused on applying for this position based on that criteria and what they can learn about the community and all. It's not going to be a cut and paste. We see that too. A cut and paste of, well, I've got 37 applicants out there and I just have to be very careful. I cut and paste so I don't have the wrong district name in the letter, that kind of stuff. The best candidates will take advantage of all that information that is out there.
And I just want to remind everyone, it's not just the 5 board members' criteria, it is the community's criteria. That is based on that feedback, which is why it's so important to take that survey. And the survey, again, it's not just multiple choice, it's also allows for narrative, additional information, additional thoughts to go in there as well. Anyone else?
Good question.
Mr. Belcher, you have a question.
So our stream actually cut out at the very beginning, and I was rebooting it, and so it cut in just as you were getting past introducing yourself. So understanding you have a wealth of experience in the area, would you be able to just recap that in 25 seconds?
Sure.
Thank you. Sorry.
25 seconds is probably far too long. Right, so I had just earlier mentioned I'm recently retired 3 years ago, retired 36, 37, I lost track. Career educator, most recently as superintendent of Cheyenne Mountain School District. I've lived in El Paso County since 1997. So I'm intimately familiar with the area and the districts, and I think that provides a real advantage in this work. It's one of the reasons I wanted to do it. I probably won't do it for much longer because as time goes on, I will become less and less relevant in that regard. But right now, I'm very close to the work, and so I've done 16 searches across Colorado through McPherson and J protocols, and I'm really excited to have number 17 be District 38. So thank you for that, Mark.
25 seconds on the dot.
Well, if there's no more questions, and also keep in mind that we as a board are also open to engaging in dialogue with anybody in our community. So if there's something that you think of after the fact, or you just want to say, hey, great job, D38 board, just reach out to us. Our emails are our first letter of our first name and our last name at lewispalmer.org. And we also have schoolboard@lewispalmer.org. You're not on there yet? Oh, that's T Brown too. Todd is T Brown too. So again, thank you guys. I know it's a Monday night and things are going to move quickly, but again, we want to make sure that we are being transparent in the process and engaging and doing this along with our community. And we're excited about the work that lies ahead, and we're excited to see who comes forth, and we're excited to see who becomes our next superintendent. And again, I also want to reiterate that Dr. Summers has got some big shoes to fill. We've accomplished a lot under his leadership, and so I want to make sure that we also say that how grateful and thankful we are for Dr. Summers in this district as well. And again, we'll be reaching out to staff and talking to the school buildings as well, and dialoguing with our parents and our staff members and our students, because we want to make sure that that dialogue and that two-way communication is continuing. And if there's no more questions, going once, going once and twice. Shoot.
As you were talking, I was formulating a question. You're saying you're going to go out to buildings and meet with parents, staff, and whatnot. Will that information then become part of that survey, and in that realm as well, the dialogue that you're having with the community?
Yes. So the most important information that will be gleaned is from the survey, but that dialogue still goes into our deliberation process as we're going through this process and asking questions as well. And so we do want to hear from our community.
So please don't leave any of these behind. Take some with you and hand them to folks you might know, right? So help us in that distribution network, inviting folks to take the survey. So.
And
thank you very much.
I want to say one thing about the survey too, real quick. Similar to other surveys that we do, when you're doing your survey, there's multiple people in a household. So we want to make sure that we're capturing that feedback from multiple people in a household. But if we start to see an IP address, we're not going to know. It's a confidential survey. So we don't know who's taking the survey. But let's say you have 20 IP addresses that are the same. Well, yeah, we're going to make sure that that feedback is fair and that everybody has an equal voice and that not one voice overshadows another. All right. Well, thank you guys so much and have a good evening. And our next board meeting, by the way, is upcoming on Monday.